8 Habits of Emotionally Stable People. You can learn them. Emotionally stable people are not calmer by nature. They're not luckier. They don't have easier lives. They've simply built habits that protect their inner world. This book is not about becoming unshakable. It's about becoming recoverable. Because stability is not about never falling, it's about how quickly you return to yourself. Introduction. You've probably met someone who seems emotionally stable. They don't get easily rattled. They don't spiral when things go wrong. They stay calm in situations that would send most people into panic or rage or shut down. And you might have assumed they're just built differently, that they have some natural gift for staying balanced, that they were born with thicker skin or a quieter mind. Emotional stability is not a personality trait. It's not something you either have or you don't. It's a set of habits, specific, learnable behaviors that anyone can practice. And the people who seem stable, they've practiced them, often without realizing it, often because they had to, because life gave them reasons to learn how to regulate themselves, how to recover quickly, how to stay grounded when everything around them was chaos. They're not special, they're just skilled, and you can learn the same skills. This book is about 8 habits, 8 patterns that emotionally stable people use to navigate their inner world. Not to control it, not to suppress it, but to work with it, to move through emotions without getting stuck in them, to feel deeply without being destabilized. These habits are simple, not easy but simple, and they work. Not because they eliminate emotion, but because they change your relationship to it. They teach you that you can feel something without it taking over, that you can be upset without spiraling, that you can regulate yourself back to baseline instead of waiting for the world to calm down first. Emotional stability doesn't mean you never get anxious, angry, sad, or overwhelmed. It means those states don't last as long. They don't hit as hard, and they don't define your day. You feel them, you move through them, and you return to yourself. That's the difference. Most books about emotional regulation focus on techniques, breathing exercises, thought patterns, cognitive reframes, and those things can help, but they're not the foundation. The foundation is how you relate to your emotions in the first place. Whether you see them as threats or information, whether you fight them or allow them, whether you trust yourself to handle them or fear that they'll break you. Stable people have built that foundation. And once you have it, the techniques work better. The tools become easier to use, because you're not fighting yourself anymore. This book is divided into 3 parts. The first part explores what emotional stability actually is, what it looks like, what it's not, and why some people seem to have it while others don't. The second part is the core, the 8 habits. Each one is a specific practice, a way of being with yourself that builds resilience, reduces reactivity, and creates inner steadiness. The third part is about living with these habits, how they change your relationships, your work, your daily experience, and how to keep practicing them even when you slip. You don't have to master all 8 habits to feel different. Even one will shift something. Even practicing one of these patterns will start to change how you experience your inner world. Because your nervous system learns. It adapts, and when you give it repeated experiences of regulation, of pausing, of recovering, it starts to default to those patterns instead of spiraling. You're not rewiring your personality. You're just teaching your system a better way. Pause. So if you've ever felt like you're too sensitive, too reactive, Too unstable know this: you're not broken. You're not unfixable. You just haven't been taught these habits yet. And now you will be. Let's begin. Slow pause. Part I: What emotional stability really is. Chapter 1. Stability is not control. Control looks like strength. Stability feels like safety. There's a common mistake people make when they think about emotional stability. They think it means control. That stable people have mastered the art of keeping their emotions in check, of staying calm no matter what, of never losing their composure, and so they try to control themselves. They suppress what they're feeling. They push down anger, swallow sadness, hide anxiety. They hold it together on the outside while everything churns on the inside. And for a while it works. They look stable. They seem fine. But inside the pressure is building. Control is not stability. Control is suppression. And suppression always has a cost. When you suppress emotion, you don't make it go away. You just delay it. You push it down into your body, into your nervous system, where it sits and waits. And eventually it comes out, sometimes as an outburst, sometimes as numbness, sometimes as physical symptoms: headaches, tension, exhaustion, sometimes as a breakdown that seems to come out of nowhere but has actually been building for months. Emotionally stable people don't control their emotions, they regulate them. And regulation is different. Regulation means you feel the emotion. You acknowledge it. You let it be there without letting it take over. You work with it instead of against it. You don't suppress anger, you notice it. Understand what it's telling you and decide how to respond. You don't push down sadness, you let it move through you. Give it space and then let it pass. You don't hide anxiety, you recognize it, ground yourself, and act from clarity instead of panic. Control says this feeling is not allowed. Regulation says this feeling is here. What does it need? Control tightens. Regulation softens. Control eventually breaks. Regulation endures. The reason control breaks is simple. Emotions are not optional. They're biological. They're part of how your nervous system processes information and responds to the world. You can't choose not to feel. You can only choose what you do with the feeling. And when you choose suppression, when you choose control, you're working against your own system. You're treating emotion like an enemy instead of recognizing it as information. Stable people understand this. They know that emotions aren't the problem. The problem is getting stuck in them, letting them dictate every decision, reacting from them without pause. So they've learned to feel without being consumed, to acknowledge without obeying, to let the emotion exist while still maintaining their grounding. That's regulation, and it's a skill, not a personality trait, a skill you can learn. Here's what regulation looks like in practice. You feel anger rising. Instead of pushing it down or lashing out, you pause. You notice I'm angry. You feel where it sits in your body. You breathe. You ask, what is this anger about? What do I actually need right now? And then you respond from that clarity, not from the heat of the emotion, but from the information underneath it. You feel sadness coming. Instead of distracting yourself or telling yourself to toughen up, you let it be there. You cry if you need to. You sit with it for a few minutes. You don't make it mean something terrible about your life or yourself. You just let it move through. And then it does. It passes. And you're still here, still okay. You feel anxiety spiking. Instead of spiraling or forcing yourself to calm down, You ground yourself. You notice your surroundings. You slow your breath. You remind yourself this is just my nervous system reacting. It will pass, and you let it settle at its own pace, without fighting it, without feeding it. That's what stable people do. They don't control. They don't suppress. They regulate. And over time, regulation becomes easier. Because your nervous system learns the pattern. It learns that emotions are safe to feel, that you can handle them, that they don't have to become emergencies. And when your system trusts that, it stops reacting so intensely in the first place. So if you've been trying to control your emotions, if you've been holding it all in, trying to stay composed, forcing yourself to be calm, you can stop. You don't have to do that anymore. You can feel. You can let it be messy. You can regulate instead of suppress. And in that shift, you'll find something that control never gave you. Real stability, the kind that lasts. The kind that feels like safety instead of tension. The kind that doesn't break. Chapter 2. Why some people seem unshakable. They feel just as much, they just recover faster. When you watch someone who's emotionally stable, it can seem like nothing bothers them, like they're immune to stress, like they just naturally stay calm while everyone else is falling apart. But that's not what's happening. They feel just as much as you do. They get anxious, they get frustrated, they get hurt. They experience disappointment, fear, sadness, anger. The difference is not in the intensity of the feeling. It's in how quickly they recover. Most people, when they get upset, stay upset for a long time. The emotion lingers. It colors the rest of their day. It loops in their mind. It affects their mood, their interactions, their ability to focus. They might still be angry about something that happened in the morning when they go to bed at night. They might replay a conversation over and over, feeling the sting of it each time. But stable people don't do that. They feel the emotion. It's sharp. It's real. And then it passes. And they move on. This isn't because they're detached. It's not because they don't care. It's because they've learned how to close the loop. They don't hold on to the emotion longer than it needs to be held. They don't feed it with rumination. They don't let it spiral into a story about what it means or what might happen next. They feel it, process it, and let it go. And that's the hidden skill. The thing that makes them seem unshakable. Not that they don't shake, but that they steady themselves quickly. Recovery is a skill, and like any skill, it gets better with practice. The more you practice recovering, the faster it happens. The more your nervous system learns the pattern of feel, regulate, return to baseline, the more efficient the process becomes. And eventually, what used to take hours takes minutes. What used to derail your whole day becomes a brief disruption. A wave that passes instead of a flood that drowns. This is why emotional reactions are not weakness. Feeling something strongly doesn't mean you're unstable. It means you're human. The instability comes from what happens after the feeling, from whether you get stuck in it, from whether you let it define the rest of your day. Stable people feel intensely, but they don't stay there. They move through. Here's an example. Two people have the same bad interaction at work. Someone dismisses their idea in a meeting. It's frustrating. It stings. Person one feels the frustration, and then they start replaying the moment. They think about what they should have said. They imagine confronting the person. They ruminate on whether this means their co-workers don't respect them. They carry the frustration into the next meeting, the drive home, the evening with their family. Person 2 feels the same frustration, but they notice it. They acknowledge that was frustrating. They take a few breaths. They decide whether it's worth addressing or letting go. And then they move on to the next thing. Same trigger, same initial reaction. Different outcome, not because person 2 is stronger or more resilient by nature, but because they've practiced recovering. They've built the habit of not staying stuck. The real advantage of stability is not that you don't get upset. It's that getting upset doesn't cost you as much. It doesn't take you out for hours. It doesn't spiral into anxiety or self-doubt. It doesn't drain all your energy. You feel it. You recover. You continue. And that makes everything easier, not because life is easier, but because you're not adding unnecessary suffering on top of what's already hard. So when you look at someone who seems unshakable, remember they're not. They're just practiced. They've learned how to feel without getting stuck, how to regulate without suppressing, how to recover instead of ruminate, and you can learn that too. It's not about being born calm. It's about building the habits that bring you back to calm. And that's what the rest of this book is about. Slow pause. Part 2, the 8 habits core of the book. Habit 1. They don't argue with their emotions. Stable people listen before they respond. The first habit of emotionally stable people is this: they don't fight with their feelings. When an emotion shows up, they don't immediately try to talk themselves out of it. They don't tell themselves they shouldn't feel that way. They don't judge it or dismiss it or try to logic it away. They just let it be there. At least for a moment, they listen. This is counterintuitive for most people, because we've been taught that negative emotions are problems. That if we feel anxious, we should think positive. That if we feel angry, we should calm down. That if we feel sad, we should cheer up. We've been taught to argue with our emotions, to challenge them, to override them with rational thought. But here's the problem: emotions don't respond to argument. They don't care about logic. They're not coming from the thinking part of your brain. They're coming from the feeling part, the survival part, the part that reacts before you can think. And when you argue with that part, it just gets louder. Think about what happens when you try to talk yourself out of anxiety. You feel anxious. Your heart is racing. Your thoughts are spinning. And you tell yourself there's nothing to be anxious about. This is irrational. Just calm down. Does that work? Almost never. Usually it makes it worse. Because now you're anxious and frustrated, anxious about being anxious, judging yourself for not being able to control it. The emotion doesn't lessen, it intensifies. Stable people know this, so they don't argue. They acknowledge. They say, I'm anxious right now. Not I shouldn't be anxious. Not this is stupid. Just I'm anxious. And in that acknowledgement, something shifts. The emotion is seen. It's allowed. It doesn't have to fight to be noticed. And when an emotion is acknowledged, it often softens. Not always, not immediately, but eventually, because all emotions want us to be felt. That's their function, their signals, information from your nervous system. And when you receive the signal, when you say, I hear you, the urgency decreases. This doesn't mean you obey every emotion. Acknowledging is not the same as acting on it. You can feel angry and not lash out. You can feel anxious and not avoid the thing you're anxious about. You can feel sad and still show up for your day. You're not letting the emotion control you. You're just letting it exist without making it wrong. Here's how this works in practice. You feel anger rising. Instead of thinking I need to calm down or I shouldn't feel this way, you pause. You notice I'm angry. You might even say it out loud or write it down, just naming it. And then you ask, what is this anger about? Not in a judgmental way, in a curious way, like you're investigating information. Maybe the anger is telling you a boundary was crossed. Maybe it's telling you you're overwhelmed. Maybe it's telling you something feels unfair. You listen to what it's saying, and then you decide what to do with that information. The same with sadness. You feel it coming. Instead of pushing it away or distracting yourself, you let it be there. You say, I'm sad right now. You don't make it mean something terrible. You don't spiral into I'm always sad or my life is falling apart. You just let it be a current state, and then you let it move through. You cry if you need to. You sit with it. You let it exist without resistance. And usually after a few minutes it eases. Not because you forced it to, but because you stopped fighting it. With anxiety, the same principle applies. You feel it. You name it. I'm anxious. You don't argue with it. You don't tell yourself you shouldn't be. You just acknowledge it. And then you ground yourself. You breathe. You remind yourself this is just a feeling. It will pass. You're not trying to make it go away. You're just not adding fuel to it. You're not spiraling. You're just being with it until it settles. This habit, not arguing with your emotions, is foundational because all the other habits build on it. You can't regulate what you won't acknowledge. You can't recover from what you're still fighting. So the first step is always the same. Stop arguing, start listening. Let the emotion be there. Let it have a voice. And then, from that place of acknowledgement, you can decide what to do next. This takes practice, especially if you've spent years trying to control or suppress your feelings. It will feel strange at first to just let them exist, but over time it gets easier, and you'll notice something. The emotions you used to fear, the ones you thought would overwhelm you if you let them in, they're not as scary as you thought. They're just feelings, and you can handle them. Habit 2. They pause before reacting. The pause is where power lies. The second habit of emotionally stable people is one of the most powerful, and it's incredibly simple. They pause. Between the trigger and the response, between the feeling and the action, they insert a moment of space, a breath, a beat, a few seconds where they don't react automatically. And in that pause, everything changes. Most emotional instability comes from reacting too quickly, from going straight from feeling to action without any space in between. Someone says something that bothers you, and you snap back. You feel anxious, and you immediately start avoiding. You feel hurt, and you shut down. The reaction is instant, automatic. And often it makes things worse. Because when you react from the heat of the emotion, you're not thinking clearly. You're not choosing your response. You're just discharging the feeling, and the fallout from that, the conflict, the regret, the damage adds more emotional weight to carry. Stable people have learned to interrupt that automatic reaction, not by suppressing the feeling, but by creating space around it. They feel the trigger, they notice the emotion rising, and then they pause. They don't react immediately. They don't speak. They don't act. They just wait, for a breath, for 5 seconds, for long enough to let the initial surge pass. And then they respond, from a clearer place, from choice instead of impulse. This pause doesn't have to be long. It's not about taking a timeout every time you feel something. It's just a moment, a brief interruption in the automatic chain of feeling to action. But that moment is where power lies. Because in that moment, you're no longer at the mercy of the emotion. You're with it, but you're not driven by it. Here's how it works. Someone criticizes you. You feel the sting. Defensiveness rises. You want to argue, to explain, to defend yourself. But instead of speaking immediately, you pause. You take a breath. You notice, I feel defensive. And in that pause, you can ask yourself, is this worth engaging with? What do I actually want to say? And then you respond. Maybe you say something calm. Maybe you say nothing. Maybe you choose to address it later when you're less activated. But whatever you do, it's a choice, not a reaction. Or you feel anxious about something. The urge to avoid it is immediate. To procrastinate, to distract yourself, to shut down. But you pause. You notice the anxiety. You breathe. You ask what would be helpful right now. And maybe you still decide to take a break. But it's intentional. You're not just running from the feeling. You're making a choice about how to manage it. The pause works because it engages a different part of your brain. When you react instantly, you're operating from the amygdala, the part that handles threat and emotion. It's fast, it's automatic, and it's not very nuanced. But when you pause, you give the prefrontal cortex, the thinking, decision-making part, time to come online. And that part can see options, can consider consequences, can choose a response that aligns with what you actually want. This habit also trains your nervous system. Every time you pause instead of reacting, you're teaching your system that emotions are not emergencies, that you can feel something and not have to act on it immediately. Over time, your system learns to stay calmer because it knows there's space. It knows you're not going to panic, and so it doesn't need to escalate as much. The pause itself becomes regulating. Creating a pause doesn't require perfect conditions. You don't need to be in a quiet room. You don't need to meditate first. You just need to interrupt the automatic response. And you can do that anywhere. You can press your feet into the ground. You can take one slow breath. You can count to 5 in your head. You can say to yourself, wait. Just one small action that breaks the chain. At first, you'll forget. You'll react before you remember to pause. That's normal. You're working against years of conditioning. But the more you practice, the more automatic it becomes. You start to notice the moment before the reaction. You catch yourself, and you pause. And over time, those pauses get easier, longer, more natural. And your responses become more aligned with who you want to be, not who your emotions are demanding you be in that instant. The pause is where power lies, not in controlling the emotion, not in suppressing the reaction, but in choosing what comes next. And that choice makes all the difference. Habit 3. They regulate their nervous system daily. Stability is built when nothing is wrong. The third habit might be the most misunderstood, because most people only think about regulation when they're already dysregulated, when they're anxious, overwhelmed, or upset. But stable people don't wait until they're in crisis to regulate. They do it every day. When nothing is wrong, when they're calm, when they're fine, because they understand something crucial. Stability is built in the calm, not in the storm. Your nervous system has a baseline, a resting state, and that baseline is shaped by what you do most of the time, not just in moments of stress. If you're constantly activated, rushing, multitasking, consuming stressful information, never resting, your baseline rises. your system gets stuck in a state of low-level alarm. And from that elevated baseline, it doesn't take much to push you into full dysregulation. But if you regularly bring your system back down, if you give it repeated experiences of calm, your baseline lowers. And from a lower baseline, you're less reactive, less easily overwhelmed, more resilient. Stable people know this, so they practice regulation when they don't need it. They build calm into their day as a maintenance practice, not as emergency intervention. And that makes all the difference. This doesn't have to be complicated. It doesn't require an hour of meditation or a perfect morning routine. It just requires small, consistent moments of regulation. It could be 3 minutes of slow breathing in the morning. It could be a short walk without your phone. It could be stretching, sitting in silence, listening to calming music. It doesn't matter what the practice is. What matters is that it signals to your nervous system you're safe. You can rest. These practices work best when they're consistent, not perfect. Not every single day, but regular enough that your system starts to recognize the pattern. Your body learns, oh, this is when we slow down. This is when we reset. And over time, it starts to crave that. It starts to settle more easily because the pattern is familiar. One of the simplest daily regulation practices is breath work. Not complicated techniques, just slow, intentional breathing. You breathe in for 4 counts, out for 6. You do this for 2 or 3 minutes. This activates your parasympathetic nervous system, the rest and digest response. It signals to your body that there's no threat, that it's safe to relax. And if you do this every day, your baseline stress level drops. Your system spends more time in a calm state. And when stress does come, you're starting from a lower place. Movement is another powerful regulator. Not intense exercise, just gentle, mindful movement, walking, stretching, yoga. Anything that gets you out of your head and into your body. Movement helps discharge the tension that accumulates throughout the day. It processes the activation that your nervous system holds, and it brings you back to a grounded state. You can also regulate through stillness, through doing nothing. Just sitting, just being. Most people are uncomfortable with this. They fill every moment with distraction, with screens, with noise, with productivity. But stillness is regulating. It gives your system permission to stop, to not be in task mode, to just exist. Even 5 minutes of sitting and doing nothing can reset your baseline. Another practice is limiting your exposure to activation, to things that spike your nervous system unnecessarily. The news, social media, drama, conflict you're not part of but consume anyway. All of that raises your baseline. It keeps your system on alert, and it makes you more reactive throughout the day. Stable people are intentional about what they let in. They don't consume stress they don't need to. They protect their nervous system like it's a resource, because it is. These daily practices don't prevent you from ever getting upset. They don't eliminate stress, but they do 2 things. First, they lower your baseline, so you're starting each day from a calmer place. And second, they teach your nervous system the pattern of regulation, of returning to calm, so when you do get activated, you recover faster. Stability is not built in moments of crisis. It's built in the small, boring moments, the unremarkable ones. The ones where you choose to breathe slowly instead of rushing, where you choose to walk instead of scroll, where you choose to sit in silence instead of filling every second. Those moments add up, and over time, They change your baseline. They change how quickly you react, how intensely you feel, how fast you recover. They make you more stable, not because you're trying harder in the hard moments, but because you're practicing in the easy ones. Habit 4. They choose energy over explanation. Not everything needs to be explained or fixed. The fourth habit is one that saves emotionally stable people an enormous amount of energy. And it's simple. They don't feel the need to explain everything, to justify their choices, to defend their feelings, to make sure everyone understands their perspective. They choose energy over explanation. Most people leak energy through over-explaining. They feel like they need to justify why they feel the way they feel, why they made the choice they made, why they need what they need. Someone asks why they can't come to an event, and they launch into a detailed explanation. They list all the reasons. They anticipate objections. They make sure the other person understands it's not personal. Someone questions their decision, and they feel compelled to defend it, to prove it's the right choice, to explain their reasoning in exhaustive detail. And all of that takes energy, emotional energy, mental energy, energy that could have gone toward actually living their life. Stable people have learned that most things don't need to be explained, or at least not to the degree we think they do. You don't need to justify your boundaries. You don't need to defend your feelings. You don't need to make sure everyone agrees with your choices. You can just say what you need to say and let that be enough. This doesn't mean you never explain anything. It just means you're selective. You ask yourself, is this explanation necessary? Or am I just trying to manage someone else's reaction? And if it's the latter, you let it go. You say, I can't make it. Not I can't make it because of X, Y, and Z. And I feel terrible and I really wish I could, but. You say that doesn't work for me. Not that doesn't work for me because I have these 17 reasons. And I hope you understand and I'm sorry. You give the simple truth. And you let the other person have their reaction, without feeling responsible for managing it. Over-explaining often comes from a fear of being misunderstood, or a fear of being judged. You think if you just explain enough, the other person will see your side, they'll approve, they'll agree. But most of the time, that doesn't happen. People hear what they want to hear. They interpret through their own lens, and no amount of explaining changes that. So you end up exhausting yourself trying to control their perception, and it doesn't work anyway. Stable people understand this, so they release the need to be understood by everyone. They trust that the people who matter will give them the benefit of the doubt. And the people who don't, well, no amount of explaining will change that. So they save their energy. They keep their explanations brief, and they move on. This habit also applies to internal explanation, to the stories you tell yourself about why you feel a certain way. A lot of people feel something and immediately need to figure out why, to trace it back to a cause, to make sense of it. And sometimes that's helpful, but often it's just another form of rumination. You're spinning in your head, trying to solve the feeling instead of just feeling it. Stable people let themselves feel without needing to explain it. They trust that feelings don't always have clear origins, that sometimes you're just sad, or anxious, or irritable, and that's okay. You don't need to justify it to yourself. You just let it be. Choosing energy over explanation also means knowing when to let things go, when to not engage in the argument, when to not correct the misunderstanding, when to let someone believe what they're going to believe. Because some battles aren't worth the energy. Some conversations drain more than they resolve. And stable people are good at recognizing that. They ask, is this worth my energy? And if the answer is no, they let it go. This can be hard, especially if you're someone who values being understood, who values communication, who wants to make sure everyone is on the same page. But there's a cost to that, a cost to always explaining, always justifying, always managing perceptions. And at some point you have to decide what's more important, being understood by everyone, or protecting your energy. Stable people choose energy. You don't owe everyone an explanation. You don't have to justify yourself. You don't have to make sure everyone sees your side. You can just be, and let that be enough. And when you stop spending energy on unnecessary explanations, you have more energy for the things that actually matter, for the relationships that nourish you, for the work that fulfills you, for your own internal world. And that makes all the difference. Habit 5. They don't personalize everything. Most things aren't about you even when they feel like they are. The 5th habit is one of the most freeing. And it's this: emotionally stable people don't take everything personally. When someone is short with them, they don't immediately assume it's about them. When something goes wrong, they don't assume it's their fault. When someone doesn't respond to a message, they don't spiral into "they must be mad at me." They understand that most things other people do are about those people, not about them. This is hard for a lot of people, because when you're sensitive, when you care deeply, when you're attuned to others, it's easy to internalize everything. Someone seems distant, and you think, what did I do wrong? Someone criticizes your work, and you hear you're not good enough. Someone cancels plans, and you think they don't want to spend time with me. But most of the time, none of that is true. Most of the time, the other person is just dealing with their own stuff, their own stress, their own mood, their own life. And it has nothing to do with you. Stable people know this, so they create space between other people's behavior and their own self-worth. They don't assume someone's mood is because of them. They don't take criticism as a verdict on their value. They don't interpret every interaction as a reflection of how they're perceived. They just let people be people. Messy, distracted, sometimes thoughtless people who are doing their best. Or not, but either way, it's not about you. This doesn't mean you ignore your impact. If you've genuinely hurt someone, if you've made a mistake, you take responsibility. You acknowledge it. You make it right. But there's a difference between taking responsibility for your actual actions and taking on responsibility for everything you imagine you might have caused. Stable people know where that line is, and they don't cross it. Not personalizing also means recognizing that you can't control how other people perceive you. You can be kind, thoughtful, and intentional, and someone will still misunderstand you, still judge you, still project their own stuff onto you. And that's not your fault. It's not your job to manage. You can't make everyone like you. You can't make everyone think well of you. You can't control their narrative. All you can do is be yourself, act with integrity, and let go of the rest. Here's what this looks like in practice. Someone is curt with you at work. Your first thought is, did I do something wrong? But instead of spiraling, you pause. You remind yourself, this probably isn't about me. Maybe they're stressed. Maybe they're having a bad day. Maybe they're dealing with something you don't know about. And you let it go. You don't take it on. You don't make it mean something about you. or someone gives you feedback, it stings. Your instinct is to feel like you're being attacked, like you're not good enough, but you separate the feedback from your worth. You ask, is there something useful here? If there is, you take it. If there isn't, you let it go. But either way, you don't make it a referendum on who you are as a person. This habit is about emotional boundaries, about not letting other people's moods, opinions, and reactions dictate your internal state. You can care about people without absorbing their energy. You can be empathetic without making everything about you. One tool that helps with this is asking, is this mine to carry? When you feel yourself taking something on, someone's anger, someone's judgment, someone's mood, you pause and you ask, is this mine? If it's not, you set it down. You let it belong to them. You don't have to carry everything. And most of the time, you're picking up things that were never yours to begin with. Stable people also stay grounded in social situations because they're not constantly scanning for signs of rejection or judgment. They're not reading into every word, every glance, every silence. They just show up. They engage, and they trust that if something is wrong, they'll be told directly. They don't create problems that don't exist. This doesn't mean you're oblivious. You're still aware, still attuned, but you're not hypervigilant. You're not assuming the worst. You're just present, without the added layer of anxiety about how you're being perceived. And that makes social interaction so much easier, because you're not managing your anxiety on top of the actual interaction. Not personalizing everything is freedom. It's freedom from the constant weight of other people's moods, from the fear of judgment, from the need to be liked by everyone. You get to just be, without taking on the world. And that lightness, that space, is part of what makes emotionally stable people seem so steady. They're not carrying what isn't theirs. Habit 6. They self-soothe without escaping. Comfort doesn't have to mean avoidance. The sixth habit is about how emotionally stable people calm themselves down. Because they do. They absolutely seek comfort when they're upset or overwhelmed or stressed. But they don't escape. They don't numb. They don't avoid the feeling entirely. They self-soothe in a way that's present. That's grounded. That doesn't create more problems later. Most people, when they're uncomfortable, reach for something that takes them away from the feeling. They scroll endlessly. They binge watch shows. They eat when they're not hungry. They drink. They shop. They lose themselves in distractions. And in the moment, it works. The discomfort lessens. The feeling fades into the background. But it doesn't actually go away. It's just postponed, and often, the escape itself adds another layer: guilt, shame, consequences, more stress. So you end up feeling worse than you did before. Stable people have learned to tell the difference between soothing and escaping, between comfort and avoidance. Soothing is being kind to yourself while still staying present. Escaping is running from the feeling entirely. Soothing brings you back to your body, back to calm, back to yourself. Escaping takes you further away, and stable people choose soothing. So what does healthy self-soothing look like? It's gentle. It's intentional, and it doesn't require you to leave yourself. It might be wrapping yourself in a blanket and sitting quietly. It might be taking a bath. It might be listening to calming music. It might be going for a walk. It might be calling a friend who makes you feel safe. It's doing something that soothes your nervous system without shutting down your awareness. The key difference is this: soothing acknowledges the feeling. Escaping denies it. When you soothe yourself, you're saying, I'm upset right now, and I'm going to be kind to myself while I feel this. When you escape, you're saying, I don't want to feel this. I'm going to make it go away. And that subtle difference changes everything. Soothing works because it regulates your nervous system. It sends the message you're safe, you can calm down, but it doesn't bypass the emotion. The emotion is still there. You're just creating a container for it. A safe space where it can exist without overwhelming you. And eventually it passes, because you didn't suppress it. You didn't avoid it. You just let it move through while you held yourself gently. Escaping, on the other hand, teaches your nervous system that feelings are dangerous, that they need to be avoided, that you can't handle them, and over time, that makes you less resilient, more reactive, more dependent on external things to regulate you, because you never learned how to be with yourself in discomfort. Here's an example. You've had a hard day. You feel heavy, sad, exhausted. Escaping looks like immediately turning on the TV and watching for 4 hours. Not because you enjoy what you're watching, but because it numbs you. It fills the space so you don't have to feel. Soothing looks like sitting with the heaviness for a few minutes, letting yourself cry if you need to, and then making tea and wrapping yourself in something soft, or taking a walk, or doing something gentle that feels like care. You're still seeking comfort, but you're not running. Or you're anxious, your mind is racing. You feel restless. Escaping looks like scrolling social media for an hour. Not engaging, just consuming. Letting the endless stream of content distract you from your thoughts. Soothing looks like acknowledging the anxiety, grounding yourself in your body, breathing, and then doing something calming that brings you back to the present. Stretching, journaling, sitting outside. Again, you're seeking relief, but you're staying present. Stable people also know when to rest, when to actually stop, when to not push through. A lot of people confuse soothing with productivity. They think rest has to be earned, that they need to do more before they're allowed to stop. But stable people give themselves permission to rest when they need it, without guilt, without conditions. They understand that rest is soothing, that sometimes the kindest thing you can do for yourself is nothing. Another form of healthy self-soothing is physical touch, warmth, gentle pressure. You can place your hand on your heart. You can hug yourself. You can hold something soft. You can take a warm shower. These things are regulating. They signal safety to your nervous system, and they keep you connected to your body instead of lost in your head. The goal isn't to never seek comfort. It's to seek comfort in ways that don't harm you, in ways that actually help. And over time, you start to notice which things are soothing and which things are escaping. You notice how you feel after scrolling, after eating mindlessly, after numbing. You feel worse, more disconnected, more depleted, but after soothing, after being present with yourself, after choosing gentleness, you feel steadier, still maybe not great, but not worse, and sometimes a little better. Self-soothing without escaping is an act of trust. You're trusting that you can handle the feeling, that you don't need to run from it, that you can be with yourself in discomfort and survive. And every time you do that, you build that trust. You prove to yourself that you're capable, that feelings are not dangerous, that you can regulate yourself without losing yourself. And that trust is stability. Habit 7. They recover, not ruminate. Rumination feels productive. Recovery actually helps. The seventh habit is one of the most important, and it's this: emotionally stable people don't ruminate. They recover. They don't replay the upsetting conversation over and over. They don't loop through what they should have said or what it means or what might happen next. They feel the feeling, they process it, and then they close the loop. They move on. Rumination is seductive. It feels like you're doing something, like you're working through the problem, like if you just think about it enough, you'll figure it out. But you're not working through it. You're just keeping it alive. Every time you replay the moment, you reactivate the emotion, you re-experience the hurt, the anger, the frustration. You're not processing it. You're just repeating it, and that keeps you stuck. Stable people recognize rumination for what it is. It's not problem solving. It's not productive reflection. It's a loop, a mental pattern that feeds on itself, and they've learned how to interrupt it. The first step is noticing when you're ruminating, because it often feels automatic. You don't realize you're doing it until you've been stuck in it for an hour. But there are signs. You're thinking the same thoughts over and over. You're replaying the same scenario. You're asking the same questions that don't have answers. When you notice that, you name it. I'm ruminating. And then you make a choice. You can keep looping, or you can choose recovery. Recovery means letting the loop close, letting the event be over, letting the emotion finish. You ask yourself, is there anything I actually need to do about this? If yes, you do it. You send the message, you make the decision, you have the conversation. If no, you let it go. This doesn't mean you suppress the feeling. You still feel it. You still process it, but you do it once, maybe twice, and then you release it. You don't keep circling back. One tool that helps is externalizing, getting the thought out of your head. You write it down, all of it, everything you're thinking, every version of the story, every worry, and then you close the notebook, and you let it stay on the page, or you say it out loud, to yourself, to someone you trust. You give the thought form, and then you let it go. Another tool is redirection. When you catch yourself ruminating, you shift your focus, not to distract, but to move your attention somewhere else. You focus on something physical. You move your body. You engage your senses. You do something that requires focus. You're not avoiding the feeling. You're just not feeding the loop. Stable people also set boundaries with their own thoughts. They recognize when thinking is helpful and when it's just spinning. And when it's spinning, they stop. They say, I've thought about this enough. There's nothing new to discover here. I'm choosing to move on. And they do. This can feel uncomfortable at first, especially if you're used to ruminating as a way of processing. It feels like you're leaving something unfinished. But rumination never finishes. It just keeps going. The only way to finish is to choose to stop. Recovery also means coming back to the present, because rumination lives in the past, in what happened, in what you wish had happened differently. But the present is where you have power, where you can act, where you can choose what comes next. So you bring yourself back. You notice what's here, right now. You ground yourself in this moment, and you let the past stay in the past. Here's what this looks like in practice. You had a conflict with someone. It didn't go well, and now you're replaying it. What they said, what you said, what you should have said. You catch yourself. You notice I'm ruminating. You ask, is there anything I need to do? Maybe you need to apologize, or clarify, or set a boundary. If yes, you do it, and then you let it go. If no, you just let it go. You write it down if you need to. You talk it through once, and then you move on. Or you're anxious about something in the future. You keep imagining worst-case scenarios, playing out all the ways it could go wrong. You notice I'm ruminating. You ask, is there anything I can do to prepare? If yes, you do it. If no, you redirect. You bring yourself back to the present. You remind yourself, I can't solve this by worrying about it. And you let it go. Recovery is a practice. You won't do it perfectly. You'll still ruminate sometimes. That's human. But the more you practice recovering, the easier it gets. The loops get shorter, the pull gets weaker, and over time you spend less time stuck in your head, less time reliving the past or fearing the future. You spend more time here, in the present, where life is actually happening. And that's where stability lives. Habit 8. They trust their ability to handle emotions. Confidence grows when you survive your feelings. The 8th and final habit is the foundation for all the others. And it's this: emotionally stable people trust themselves. They trust that they can handle their emotions, that they can feel something hard and come out the other side, that they're not fragile, that they're not going to break. And that trust changes everything. Most emotional instability comes from fear. Fear of the feeling. Fear of being overwhelmed. Fear that if you let yourself feel too much, you won't recover, so you fight it. You suppress it. You run from it. You do anything to not fully feel. But stable people don't do that, because they've learned through experience that feelings don't destroy them. They've felt anxiety and survived. They've felt sadness and come through. They felt anger and didn't lose control. And every time they survived, they built trust. Trust in their own capacity. Trust that they can handle it. This trust doesn't come from thinking. It comes from doing. From repeatedly facing the feeling and realizing you're still okay. You can't think your way into trusting yourself. You have to experience it. And every time you let yourself feel something without running, without suppressing, without breaking, you prove to yourself that you can. This is emotional resilience, not the absence of emotion, but the confidence that you can move through it. You're not trying to never feel upset. You're building the belief that being upset is something you can handle. And when you believe that, you stop being afraid of your own emotions. You stop avoiding situations that might make you feel. You stop living defensively. You just live. Here's how this trust develops. You feel anxious. And instead of panicking about the anxiety, you let it be there. You breathe through it. You remind yourself, this is just anxiety. I felt this before. It passes. And it does pass. And you're still okay. The next time anxiety comes, it's a little less scary. Because you have evidence. You've survived it before. You feel sad, and instead of distracting yourself or telling yourself to snap out of it, you let yourself cry. You let the sadness move through. And after, you feel lighter, quieter, still sad maybe, but not overwhelmed. And you remember, I can handle sadness. It doesn't break me. You feel angry, and instead of suppressing it or lashing out, you acknowledge it. You let it burn for a moment, and then you let it settle. And you realize, I can feel anger without losing control. I can hold this and still choose my response. Each time you do this, you build the trust. And the trust builds the stability, because when you trust yourself to handle emotions, you stop seeing them as threats. You stop bracing against them. You stop living in fear of the next time you might feel something hard. You just let emotions come and go. like weather, like waves. This doesn't mean you enjoy hard feelings. It doesn't mean they're easy. But they're no longer catastrophic. They're just part of being human. And you know you can be human and still be okay. Stable people also trust their ability to recover. They've seen themselves bounce back before. They know that even when something is really hard, they'll eventually find their footing again. And that trust creates a kind of calm. Because you're not as afraid of falling. You know you can get back up. Building this trust requires you to stop avoiding discomfort. To stop protecting yourself from every possible upset. You have to let yourself feel, even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard, because every time you face it and survive, you get stronger. Not in a taught out way, but in a handle this way. This habit also means trusting your body, trusting that your nervous system knows how to regulate, that if you give it the right conditions, presence, breath, safety, it will settle. You don't have to force it. You don't have to control it. You just have to trust the process. And over time, this trust becomes automatic. You don't have to remind yourself you can handle it. You just know emotion arises. And instead of fear, there's just presence. Just the quiet confidence that says, I've got this. This is the heart of emotional stability, not the absence of feeling, but the presence of trust. Trust in yourself, in your capacity, in your resilience. And once you have that, everything else gets easier because you're not fighting yourself anymore. You're just with yourself through all of it, and that's enough. Part F in Living with Emotional Stability. Chapter 11. You don't need to be calm all the time. Stability allows emotion. It doesn't erase it. There's a misconception about emotional stability. People think it means being calm all the time, never getting upset, always staying even. But that's not stability, that's suppression or detachment. Real stability allows for emotion, for ups and downs, for bad days and hard moments. The difference is not in the feeling, it's in how you hold it. Emotionally stable people still get anxious, still get frustrated, still have days where everything feels heavy, but they don't interpret those days as failure. They don't spiral into I'm not stable enough or I should be past this by now. They just recognize I'm having a hard day. That's allowed, and they move through it without adding shame on top. Stability is not rigidity. It's flexibility. It's the ability to bend without breaking, to feel without getting stuck, to have an emotional response without it defining your entire week. You're allowed to feel. That's the whole point. The problem comes when you think feeling means you're failing, when you judge yourself for having emotions, when you expect yourself to be calm all the time. That expectation creates more instability, because now you're fighting with yourself every time you feel something. But when you let yourself feel, when you give yourself permission to have bad days, to be upset, to not be okay, the pressure releases. You're not trying to be perfect. You're just trying to be human. Stable people also know that emotional waves are normal. That you can be doing well for weeks and then have a rough day. And that rough day doesn't erase the progress. It's just a day, you feel it. You move through it, and you return to baseline. The goal is not constant calm. The goal is the ability to return, to recover, to not stay stuck. And that's something you can have even when you're feeling a lot. This is also why stable people don't fear their emotions. They know that feeling something doesn't mean it will last forever, that emotions are temporary, that they can feel intense sadness or anger or anxiety and still be fundamentally okay. The emotion is just passing through. It's not who they are. So give yourself permission to feel, to have hard days, to not be calm all the time. That's not instability, that's being alive. Stability is what lets you feel without falling apart, without losing yourself, without it taking over your whole life. And that's enough. Chapter 12. Stability in relationships and work. Stable people create calm around them without trying. One of the most noticeable effects of emotional stability is how it changes your interactions with others. Not because you're trying to be different, but because you are different. When you're stable, you bring that stability into the room, into your relationships, into your work, and people feel it. In relationships, stability looks like not reacting to every trigger, not escalating conflict, not taking things personally that aren't about you. It looks like being able to hear feedback without becoming defensive, being able to disagree without shutting down, being able to stay present even when the conversation is hard. And that creates safety for you and for the other person. When you're emotionally stable, you don't need the other person to regulate you. You can regulate yourself, so you're not constantly seeking reassurance. You're not reading into every word. You're not spiraling when they seem distant. You just trust. You trust yourself. You trust the relationship. You trust that if something is wrong, it will be communicated, and that trust makes everything easier. Stability also means less conflict, not because you avoid it, but because you don't create unnecessary conflict. You don't blow up over small things. You don't hold on to resentment. You don't punish someone for a bad mood. You just let things be what they are, and you address what actually needs to be addressed, calmly, clearly. In work, stability looks like staying grounded under pressure, not panicking when something goes wrong, not taking criticism as a personal attack. It looks like being able to focus even when you're stressed, being able to make decisions even when you're uncertain. And that makes you someone people trust, someone people want on their team, someone who can be counted on. Stable people also lead quietly. They don't have to be loud or forceful. They just bring a calm, steady energy that others gravitate toward. When everyone else is panicking, they're the one who stays level, who takes a breath, who says, "Okay, let's figure this out." And that calm is contagious. This doesn't mean you never have conflict. You do. But you navigate it differently. You don't avoid it. You don't explode. You just engage with it from a grounded place. And that makes resolution possible. Emotional stability also changes how you communicate. You're clearer, more direct, less reactive. You say what you mean. You don't hide behind passive aggressiveness or vague hints. You just communicate. And that clarity makes relationships so much easier. You also stop trying to control other people's emotions. You let them have their reactions. You don't take responsibility for managing their moods. You can be empathetic without absorbing. You can care without fixing. And that creates healthier, more balanced relationships. Stability in relationships and work is not something you perform. It's something that flows naturally from the habits you've built, from pausing, from not personalizing, from trusting yourself, from recovering instead of ruminating. All of it shows up in how you interact, how you respond, how you hold yourself in the presence of others. And that presence, that calm, grounded, non-reactive presence, is a gift, not just to others, but to yourself. Final chapter. Stability is a practice, not a personality. You weren't born unstable. You were never taught stability. If you've made it this far, you know something important. Emotional stability is not fixed. It's not something you either have or you don't. It's a practice, a set of habits, a way of being with yourself that you can learn. And you can learn it at any age, at any stage, no matter how unstable you felt before. You weren't born emotionally unstable. You just didn't learn these habits. Maybe no one taught them to you. Maybe you grew up in an environment where stability wasn't modeled. Maybe you learned to suppress or react instead of regulate. But that doesn't mean you can't learn now. The habits in this book are not complicated. They're simple, but they require practice. You have to practice not arguing with your emotions. Practice pausing before you react. Practice regulating daily. Practice choosing energy over explanation. Practice not personalizing. Practice self-soothing without escaping. Practice recovering instead of ruminating. Practice trusting yourself. And the more you practice, the more natural it becomes. You will slip. You will forget. You will have days where you react instantly, where you ruminate for hours, where you take everything personally. That's normal. That's part of the process. Stability is not perfection. It's the ability to return, to notice when you've slipped and gently bring yourself back. Every time you do that, every time you catch yourself and choose the habit instead of the pattern, you're building stability. Not all at once, but gradually, over time, and one day, you'll notice that you don't spiral as easily, that you recover faster, that you trust yourself more, and that's when you know it's working. The beautiful thing about these habits is that your nervous system remembers them. Once you've practiced regulation enough, it becomes your default. Your system learns the pattern. And then, even when you're stressed, even when you're overwhelmed, you have something to return to. A baseline, a foundation. You don't need to master all 8 habits. Even one will change things. Even practicing one of these patterns consistently will shift how you experience your inner world. So start there. Pick one. The one that resonates most. The one that feels most needed right now. And practice it daily, in small moments, when nothing is wrong and when everything is. And over time, add another and another. Not because you're trying to become perfect, but because you're building a relationship with yourself. A relationship based on trust, on presence, on gentleness. And that relationship is what stability is. This is not about fixing yourself. You're not broken. This is about learning skills you were never taught. About building habits that protect your inner world. About becoming recoverable instead of unshakable. Because you will shake, you will feel. You will have hard days. But you will also return to yourself. To calm, to baseline. And that return is everything. Closing. You don't need to master all 8 habits. Even one will change how you feel inside. And once your system learns stability, it remembers. You're not trying to eliminate emotion. You're not trying to become unshakable. You're just learning how to return to yourself. How to recover. How to hold your inner world with care. And that's all stability is. Not the absence of feeling, but the presence of trust. Trust that you can handle what comes. Trust that you'll recover. Trust that you're okay even when it's hard. These habits are yours now. You can practice them. You can return to them. You can build them into your life one small moment at a time. And as you do, you'll notice something. You feel more grounded, more present, more able to move through life without being knocked over by every wave. Not because the wave stopped coming, but because you learned how to steady yourself. Thank you for being here.